Hi, Janet Kelsey here with The Real Deal. My husband Phil and I have been bidding and participating in the Courthouse foreclosure sales for many years. In this 3-part video series, we are going to start you at square one. Phil is going to talk about how we zero in on the right property on the county foreclosure list to bid on and to avoid losses and other major headaches. This is a 3-part discussion, so be sure to watch each one. So here is Phil to start the discussion.
Okay, we're back, and we're going to talk more about the criteria that we put into to select properties that we would like to bid on. And at this point, we've discussed going out to the Clerk of the Court's website and actually getting a preliminary list of properties that would be suitable. And then we have cut and paste them, copied it into an Excel spreadsheet. You can use really whatever spreadsheet program you want, whether it's Apple, whether you're using Google Sheets, or whether you're using your Excel spreadsheet. I do give you a link to a spreadsheet on the YouTube channel that you can use. It's an empty spreadsheet that has formulas you may find useful, or you can build it into a hybrid of your own. But the first thing that I'm looking at after I bring in a copy of the sales date and I've eliminated the status, I'm only looking at active sales that are actually going to go to sale that have not been canceled, so I don't waste my time, and I brought in the case number. I'm looking at the assessed value, and I use that as a kind of acid test to further eliminate a few sales so I don't have to look at them. Now, if you're doing a small farming area, you're only bringing in a handful each time to look at, it's probably not a big deal. But if you're looking at an entire county and you've got 100 sales at one time that you need to weed through, you'll find these things useful. But if you think about assessed values, now the property appraiser will set the assessed value, and an assessed value is the value that the owner is being taxed at, and that's prior to any homestead exemptions or other exemptions that they apply to that value. But it's the value they're being taxed at. Another value that the property appraiser puts out is called the just market value. It's maybe supposed to be the actual market value, appraised value. And you can look at that. I've never been terribly confident in that number, but that's another value it puts out. But my area, that my jurisdiction uses a sales auction website service that supplies the assessed value and not the just market value. And what I do with that is I am looking for anything of an assessed value less than $100,000. So I'm further whittling down the list of properties that I might choose from. And why do I use $100,000? Well, assessed value is always going to be, roughly 70%, 80% of the market value. And the theory is that there'd be some selling cost perhaps equaling the remaining 20% if someone had to liquidate the properties. I don't know if that's actually the case. That's just what I've always understood. But regardless, the assessed value is always going to be lower, almost always in lower, except for in extraordinary circumstances like we had post-Great Recession when houses were assessed for more than what they were worth. But generally, the assessed value is going to be lower, and so I use a lower assessed value because I'm actually targeting a price range of somewhere between, for my property, somewhere between $100,000 and maybe $200,000, and this is in Orange County, Florida, and I find that price range today to be the best blue collar area that will be superior, best for rental purposes. So that's the target I'm looking for. So I find that if I go with an assessed value of $100,000, I'm probably going to catch all the ones that are in the range of that the actual market value is more like $100,000 to $200,000. Now, there are properties that are worth far more than that. The assessed value is relatively low because here in Florida we have Saver Homes deductions that are Saver Homes protection that prevents the property appraiser from raising assessed values more than a certain amount per year. And so individuals or property owners that have been in that property claiming homestead for many years, their assessed values are going to be quite low. But regardless, this is a pretty good way of zeroing in on a smaller collection, a subset of properties from this list that the market value is ultimately going to end up where I want it to be. So that's the next thing that you would look at. Then I am very focused. You can look at, you get a judgment value also with that, and I probably look at that last, but just the mechanics of that, where I feel that a large judgment, and we'll talk about it later, the bank is probably more somewhat predisposed to go ahead and bid that property up. On the other hand, a smaller judgment that's maybe below the market value, you might assume that the owner of the property or somebody who has interest in it might be fighting a little harder for keeping that equity. So those are two things to consider. Now, the most important thing that I want to zero in on, one of the most important things I want to zero in on, is the other column that comes in is I have a plaintiff name that is on that list. And the plaintiff name is important to me. And you can think of plaintiffs as falling into perhaps several categories. One would be the plaintiff is what you might expect a large bank or institution, payment processing company, and then perhaps the other designation would be that they are much smaller down the spectrum, down to very small savings and loans, or even individuals who are foreclosing that held paper themselves. The other would be that the plaintiff could be a owners association, like a condo association, a homeowner association. I want to talk about that in a minute too. And this is important to me because I generally find my perception of risk, and this is from looking at a very large number, about 1,000 sales since 2010 that occurred to third parties in Orange County, Florida, that went through the Courthouse foreclosure system. And I find that the larger banks are inclined to make perhaps less clerical mistakes, less horror stories. And the worst horror stories I've seen have been from very small entities, very small banks or small entities that were foreclosing. But you can pretty much assume that the larger banks such as U.S. Bank and Wells Fargo and Bank of America that are doing foreclosures, they do other things that are concerning, but generally, well, you can assume that they are quite good or have done it many times and are at least well practiced at it. They do make other mistakes, and there are other concerns, but if you're looking at reducing your risk of having something go wrong with the sale, and again, that's that first part of risk that I talked about, that the risk that you actually get your title, get your certificate of title in 10 days, then the larger the bank, probably the lower risk. And I would probably say the difference between a very large bank like Wells Fargo, or perhaps down to a smaller bank like BB&T or even smaller, not a huge, and this is actually going from looking at the numbers and counting which ones were successful in terms of that the bidder got their title and which ones did not get their title. Not really a huge difference, just that the larger banks just demonstrate a lot more volume.
So there you go. Try these steps and remember, practice makes perfect. And join us next week or click on the link below for the next video in this series. And remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next informative video. I'm Janet Kelsey from The Real Deal. See you real soon.